Welcome to GCSE Biology Paper 1, Bioenergetics Respiration Lesson 5. First of all, some tips to make sure you're fully focused on today's lesson. And a reminder of the run-through of today's lesson. If there are any resources you need to get hold of, can you now pause and organise? Let's get started with today's lesson then, and we'll start with some retrieval practice. Here is a retrieval practice for biology. Pause and retrieve. Here are the answers to the biology retrieval. Pause and revise. Chemistry retrieval practice. Pause and retrieve. Answers to the chemistry retrieval practice. Pause and revise. Today's physics retrieval practice. Pause and retrieve. And here are the answers to today's physics retrieval practice. Pause and revise. Before we move on to today's teaching, here are the answers to the last lesson's practice questions. So these are the answers to questions 1 to 3. Please pause and check. Answers 4 and 5. Again, pause and check. The answers to question 6. Pause and check. The answers to question 7a. Pause and check. 7b. Notice how I've worked out the answer to 7b part I. You first of all use the graph to find the concentration of lactic acid at 14 kilometers per hour. You then find the concentration of lactic acid at 8 kilometers per hour, and you subtract the one from the other to get your answer. So please pause and check. And finally, part 2 of 7b, please pause and check. Right, let's now move on to today's teacher instruction. The resource you will need is this one. If you need to print it out, please pause and organise. Okay, so today we are looking at metabolism and examples of metabolism that occur in the human body. So the first thing we need to know is what is metabolism. And metabolism is simply the sum of all the chemical reactions that take place in an organism, or all the chemical reactions that take place in an individual cell. So let's just write that down first of all. So it's the sum of all the chemical reactions in an organism or cell. Okay, now these reactions, they either basically build up molecules or break down molecules. So let's make a note of that. These reactions build up molecules and break them down. And these reactions, they're controlled by enzymes. Okay. They are controlled by enzymes. So metabolism, all of the chemical reactions that take place in an organism or a cell. The next question on the sheet is, what is metabolic rate? And metabolic rate is simply the speed at which metabolism occurs in living organisms. So let's make a note of that. The rate, or let's put in brackets speed, at which metabolism occurs in living things. The higher or the faster your metabolism, the more energy your body would use in a day. So let's just make a note of that. The higher or faster your metabolism, the more energy your body would use in a day. Okay, so we know what metabolism is and we know what the metabolic rate is. So metabolism is all the chemical reactions that occur, and the rate is how quickly they occur. Okay. Now there are a number of factors that affect a person's metabolic rate. It could be their genetics, what they've inherited, their ratio of muscle to fat, their body mass, their age, their gender, the amount of activity they do, so how much exercise they get up to, even down to environmental temperature. The temperature can affect your metabolism, and of course hormone balance. The hormones in your body can affect your metabolism as well. But what we're interested in, or what you're interested in, is basically knowing what metabolism is. And if we talk about metabolic rate, it means how fast all those chemical reactions are taking place. Right, now you also need to know some examples of the metabolism that occurs in the human body. So let's just go through a few of those now. I suppose the first thing to note is that as this topic is all about respiration, it's respiration that supplies or releases the energy to support your metabolism. So let's just make a note of that. Respiration supplies the energy to support your metabolism. So to allow these chemical reactions to take place. So let's start looking at some examples then. Let's start with the reactions we know about. Glucose is broken down during respiration. So that's one reaction that happens in your cells, whether it's aerobically in the mitochondria or anaerobically in the cytoplasm. So let's have that as number one. Let's have glucose is broken down during respiration. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, still sticking with glucose molecules can be joined together to form starch. Okay, that happens a lot in plants. If you remember when we did photosynthesis, the glucose is stored as starch because starch is an insoluble molecule. But also in plants, it can be converted to cellulose for cell walls. And of course, in humans, in muscles and in the liver, it can be converted to glycogen. Okay, so let's make a note of that. Glucose molecules are joined together, and as I said, that can be to form starch molecules, cellulose, or glycogen. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, if we look at lipids, so a lot of these things are products of digestion, if we thinking of the human body. So we get glucose when we break down starch molecules or complex carbohydrates. They're broken down to glucose, and then that glucose gets into the body, and that glucose can then be built back up into glycogen, etc. So, but also fats. Fats are broken down. Lipids are fats. Fats are broken down, aren't they, to fatty acids and glycerol? And then those fatty acids and glycerol, once in the body, can recombine to make fat or lipids. So let's just make a note of that. So lipid molecules are made from one molecule of glycerol and 3 molecules of fatty acids. So we've now looked at the use of glucose, and we've looked at how we produce lipid molecules. We can now look at how we can produce protein molecules. And again, it involves glucose, but this time the glucose is combined with nitrate ions to make amino acids. Those amino acids can join together to make polypeptide chains, which can then fold to produce proteins. So another metabolism is the production of proteins. So let me just write that down. So glucose is combined with nitrate ions to make amino acids, and then eventually proteins. Okay, and finally, a 5th example is to do with the proteins. If we've got too much protein in our body, too much to use, then what happens is the body breaks the protein down to produce something called urea, which is a toxin, and we basically get rid of that urea when we excrete. So the kidneys filter out the urea, it goes into the bladder, and then when we excrete urine. So the urine contains urea. So let me just write that down. So excess protein is broken down in a reaction to produce urea, which is excreted in our urine. Here is a diagram that illustrates the 5 examples of metabolism that you need to know about. So it's just a visual way of remembering the 5 examples that we've just been through. Okay. What I've also put here on the video are some examples of plant metabolism. So I've given you a summary of the reactions that build up substances following photosynthesis, but we went through this when we did bioenergetics photosynthesis. And we've also got a summary of the reactions that break down compounds. Okay, so all of these reactions, remember, are metabolism. Metabolism, sum of all the chemical reactions in an organism or cell. Here is a slide showing metabolism in animals. It's a summary of the reactions that build up substances following the absorption of the products of digestion. Okay, and also I've given you the summary of the reactions that break down compounds. What we need to do now is embed all this new knowledge. So can you pause and embed? Now that you've paused and embedded, we need to do some practice. So here are today's SLOP questions. So can you now pause and SLOP? The answers to today's SLOP questions. So here are the answers to questions 1 and 2. Please pause and check. The answers to question 3, pause and check. The answers to question 4, pause and check. Again, question 4b, pause and check. Question 4c, again, pause and check. Remember with this question though, before you pause and check, you get a mark for giving the answer to 3 significant figures. So if you don't do that, if you leave it as 32.075472, you wouldn't get all the marks because it specifically asks you for 3 significant figures. Here's the answer to part D. Pause and check. The answer to 4E. Again, pause and check. The answer to 4F. Pause and check. That is the end of bioenergetics respiration. So until next time, take care, look after yourselves, and be kind to others.